Perfect. All right. So before we go into IFS, I am curious, just kind of show of hands, who has some level of familiarity with internal family systems, IFS, like, okay. Okay, cool. Yeah, so some basic kind of understanding. This is not going to be brand new for anybody, which is great. So we talked in our last live call, we talked a little bit about like ways to connect to the different parts, without needing to have like a real complete understanding of the model itself. So there's a lot of ways that you can connect to the different parts of you that you don't have to know everything that we're going to go into today. And so just know that, like, if just connecting to younger versions of yourself, if you already have practices of connecting to the different parts of you that works for you, that's great. This mod, or like the framework, understanding kind of how the parts get broken down, sometimes can be helpful for people. And sometimes it can be kind of just too much information. So again, really do what works best for you, but I want to give you a little bit more of the model today, so you have that framework, and just some tools to work with the parts, when maybe you get stuck. Because if you're only working with, if you're trying to say, okay, here's this younger part of me, this 5-year-old that really wants my attention, and I'm going to connect to this 5-year-old part of me, maybe you're getting blocked, and there's something coming up that's keeping you from that being a really fruitful experience. And so we're going to talk a little bit today about like maybe why that is, and some other avenues that you can go to make that a better experience for you. Okay. And I'm going to show you some images here to help kind of help you visualize this a little bit. All right. And we're actually going to start with a little bit where we started today, which is, whoops, maybe, here we go. All right. Can you guys see a sun on your screen? Cool. All right. So you'll recognize the rays of the sun are the qualities that we just went through in that first meditation. So these are the 8 qualities of self energy. This. So again, how you know when you are experiencing self energy is when you are able to access the energy of calmness, curiosity, compassion, confidence, courage, clarity, connection, and creativity. And so this model is really helpful to look at because self is always there. We always have access to, or the energy of self, the essence of self is always there. But sometimes we just can't always feel it. Sometimes it's like a cloudy day where the sun is not visible, but we know it's still there. So it's like all those qualities are there, but sometimes the parts of us, the other parts of us, cloud over the sun. Okay, so that's our firefighters, our managers, and our exiles. And we're going to go into what those different parts are, but you can just see how they can cloud over the self. So the thing about self energy, and again, self through this lens of IFS, self knows how to heal. So self has this innate healing wisdom inside. We don't have to, it's different than some like kind of therapeutic approaches where we think we have to like really resource ourselves and really like build up practices to become more self. It's like this model takes the approach that self is innately in all of us. We all have self. We don't have to work hard to build it up. It's more of a model of subtraction, which means we work with the different parts, the different clouds that are getting in the way of self. And once we work with those parts and those clouds are able to kind of disintegrate a little bit, more self can come through. But it's not a model of like trying to add to. Again, it's a model of subtraction. We're reducing, subtracting away the clouds and allowing that self sun to come through. The other thing that I think is really important when we talk about self is not all or nothing. And I catch myself saying this too, but you maybe have heard this where it's like you're in self or you're out of self. And that's really, it's not all or nothing, just like everything else. Self is like a spectrum. So it's like how much self energy is present versus thinking I have to be all in self or I'm completely out of self. You might have, just like we kind of you experience today in the meditation, you might have more access to certain qualities of self, curiosity, compassion, something like that. You might have more access to some and less access to others. Okay. So again, it's all about a spectrum and really looking at how much self energy is there. Okay. Now we're going to go to this diagram here. All right. So the framework of IFS is one of the things I love about it is it takes a very non-pathologizing approach, which means we're not looking at what's wrong with somebody. Why are they doing this? Or how can we find a diagnosis for this person right away? So again, it takes this very non-pathologizing approach of, hey, we all have multiple parts. We all are very multidimensional. We have these sub-personalities. That doesn't make anything wrong with us. That doesn't mean we have to slap a diagnosis on this. It's just like, oh, that's part of the human experience, that we're going to have lots of different parts. Now, getting to know these parts is where a lot of the healing can come from, knowing these parts, and then the parts that are carrying certain wounds or burdens, we can unburden those parts. And that's really where that healing comes from. That's when more of that self sun can shine through. Okay. So the two separate or the two different categories of parts on a very high level is going to be our wounded parts and then our protective parts. So our wounded parts in this model, we call them the exiles. So these are parts that can often get stuck at certain ages when they have been hurt or experienced some sort of wounding in their life. So they can kind of get frozen in time. That's why you'll hear people talk about like my 5-year-old or my 7-year-old or my 13-year-old. These are parts when, potentially something traumatic, something scary happened, and that part gets stuck and frozen. And they're carrying the wounds of whatever that was, and I'm thinking even about like, sometimes it is the trauma and kind of more in the extremes that we think about for sure. And then also it's kind of the less extreme versions too, that we can still carry these burdens or these old stories about our worth, about our about whether or not we're good enough. One that I see come up kind of often in these group spaces is around kind of wounding in friendship. Maybe you've heard people talk about like a sister wound, where it's like maybe from middle school or grade school or high school, where there was, something within a friend group, you were kind of picked on or outcast, or something happened inside a friend group, and then you start to take on that burden of there's something, where I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough for to be a part of the group. I'm an outcast, I don't belong. And we can carry those burdens and those wounds into adulthood. So much of these wounds are carried on a subconscious level. They're carried in our nervous system. And again, they're exiles. We call them these exiles because we don't want to look at them. They're too painful. And so we push them into the dark shadows of our psyche. We don't want to spend time with them. We want to pretend they're not there. And they carry often, again, so much pain. And then they show up through our behaviors, through our interactions in this unconscious way that causes a lot of pain in our day-to-day life. Okay. So those are our exiles. And then we have our protective parts. And our protective parts are really there to keep us safe. They are trying to, oh, shoot. Thank you, Kim. You're seeing not the right thing. Let me change what you're seeing. Yeah, you're not supposed to be seeing the sun right now. Sorry, y'all. We're just going to stop the screen share and share again with the right model. I was seeing the right model the whole time. Sorry about that. Here. Just talking about was the exiles, the purple over here, these wounded parts. So just kind of give you a second to orient to this diagram here. So you've got all these, and again, it's often not just like one exile. We don't have just like one pain point or one wounding that happens to us in our life, and we have one exile. We often have lots of different wounded parts, lots of different exile. That's why you might hear people talk about like, yeah, I've got my 3-year-old, my 6-year-old, my 17-year-old, my 22-year-old. We've got lots of different parts that are carrying burdens. Okay, so then we're going to shift over to these protective parts over here on the right. So these protective parts, again, are here to keep us safe. They have taken on different roles in our life to try to protect the exiles. So to protect these wounded parts from ever being hurt again. Okay, and there's 2 distinct roles that these protective parts can take. There's the managers, and then there's the firefighters. So the way that can be helpful to think about it, the managers are the preventers. They want to do everything possible to prevent the exile, the wounded parts, from being triggered. So they're going to do lots of things to manage ever being hurt again. You can think of them, they have this motto of like never again. So whatever the pain was, whatever the experience was that caused wounding, the managers are here to say never again. We're going to do whatever it takes to make sure that that pain, that's very specific pain, never happens again. Even if it ends up having side effects of like other, other pain that comes from that. But it's like all it cares about is just preventing that pain from ever happening again. They often carry this responsibility, this burden of feeling very responsible. And so some examples of these protector parts, these preventative managers, these could be your inner critic. This could be people-pleasing tendencies. This could be being highly organized. This could be being a perfectionist. This desire to have to be liked by everyone. Caretaking everybody else's feelings around you, being super vigilant to know how's everybody else feeling, kind of that being overly attuned to what everybody else is feeling, and so that you can tend to everybody else's needs. It could show up as avoiding conflict. Could show up as being a chameleon, being fiercely independent. Yeah. So again, just curious from kind of a show of hands, or you can speak it if you want, but just like anybody, any of those preventative managers resonate for anybody? Anybody have any of those protective parts? Yeah. 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 Often these parts, in many ways, depending on what it is, can actually be very praised in our culture. And so they can get reinforced because not only do they protect our wounded part, but then they get reinforced of like, oh, great, look how organized you are. Look how attuned you are to everybody's needs. Look how easily adaptable you are. Look how independent you are. It's like all of these roles that this part is in gets praised and gets reinforced and then can show up even more. Now, counter to that are our firefighters, and these are a different kind of protective part. And these parts are often not reinforced by society. These parts are actually often shamed or demonized. But these parts have a very important role as well. While the managers are there to prevent pain from happening, prevent the trigger from ever, or prevent that wound from ever being triggered, the firefighters show up, just like when the fire's there, the firefighters show up in reaction to. So once that exile has been triggered, they have one job, and that one job is to stop the pain at all costs. So when that young part gets triggered, the firefighter shows up and is going to do anything and everything to make the pain go away as quickly as possible. So they really try to shift the emotional state, the emotional experience that you're in. Okay. And again, these often are not praised or reinforced by society. And they're often looked down on, because this can look like suicidal thoughts, suicidal behaviors. This can look like substance use. This can look like other compulsory behaviors. This can look like binging. This can look like numbing out, dissociating. So it's really looking in the states of, like, when we think about the nervous system, like the fight, flight, freeze, that's where these firefighters are existing, in those states of dysregulation of fight or flight or freeze. Okay. Now, the thing about these parts, and you'll see this down in the little yellow box down here, all of these parts have positive intent. So even the most destructive parts, even the parts in you that maybe you hate, even the parts that you want to get rid of, even the parts that you feel like have caused so much harm in your life, at the core of them, they have a positive intention. Does not mean their impact isn't harmful in your life, but their intent is always to protect you, always to try to keep you safe. They just don't always have all the information. That's the thing about these parts. They get very tunnel vision, especially, when you think about these like managers. Their tunnel vision is, okay, how do I know what happened when I was 7 years old, and I know I never want to feel that again. So how can I think about everything I could do to make sure that that never happens again? And then you get so tunnel vision focused on that, you don't see that, oh, I'm actually not a 7-year-old anymore. I'm actually, a 37-year-old, and things look different. I have different resources. I have different tools. I don't have to act in this way anymore. But our part doesn't know that. Our part gets stuck and hyper-focused. And the intention is always good. The intention is always, I'm just going to keep this younger part safe. Same with the firefighters. Even again, the most destructive firefighters that you can imagine, even the parts of you that you feel like have caused the most destruction in your own life, they are not doing that to destroy your life. These parts are there to try to protect you, the only way that they know how. Okay. And so really at the core, when we think about IFS, it's a very relational model. There's a lot of parallels between IFS and family systems models, of like looking at the whole system instead of one like problem child, or one focusing on one person in the family. It's the same here with this IFS model. It's like looking at the whole system. How are they all interacting together? How are they playing off of each other? How does, like, when one, maybe a firefighter shows up to try to extinguish the pain from a wounded part getting triggered, well, then maybe you have a manager come in afterwards to try to like repair what that firefighter did, the damage that happened relationally from that firefighter showing up. Then the manager shows up in response to that and tries to kind of fix things. So they're all interacting together. So we look at it as this whole system within us, instead of these one-off pieces. And really, IFS can become, once you start to, again, approach these parts and get to know all these different parts, it can be this loving way of like relating not only to yourself, but then to other people, to the parts in other people. So it shifts not only your relationship with yourself, but it shifts the relationships that you have with the other people in your life. Because just like you have this whole inner family going on, everybody else in your life also has their own inner family going on. And so you might be responding to somebody else's firefighter, or responding to somebody's manager. And so it gets, it gets a little complicated to see kind of who's showing up in an interaction between you and somebody else. Okay. So again, when we think back to, again, kind of remembering the self, the sun model. So these are all the kind of the clouds, these parts, the exiles, the managers, the firefighters. These are all the clouds that can kind of cover our self energy. And so self is different from these parts. Self, again, is that innate inner wisdom, that adult essence, competent, very capable, very wise. And when we talk about self-trust in this space, building self-trust is building trust between your self energy and all of these parts. So it's not about your managers and your firefighters and your exiles having to work it all out on their own. It's like accessing more self energy. And then self relates to your exiles, self relates to your managers, self relates to your firefighters. And you're building trust between your firefighters and yourself. You're building trust between your managers and yourself, and especially between your exiles and yourself. So the more that these parts start to trust that self energy, the more, again, that essence of what we talk about with self-trust within this model, the more self-trust is able to be there. Okay, so that's really why this framework, this IFS perspective is so important in the entire self-trust model, is because it's all about getting to know all of these different parts to build up more trust with this self, capital S, self energy. Okay, so I'm going to stop the screen share here. All right, so that's a lot of information, and again, trying to do a very like kind of high level IFS. But I'm curious what's coming up for you right away with that. There's a lot more nuance and like details we could dig into, but just like at that level, are there any questions coming up? Any